This is a production of Cornell University.
Okay. I'm kind of lonely up here after the whole scholarship family's cleared out. If someone walked in right now, they'd think I smell really bad, and you all just cleared out the front 2 rows. So, I want to talk to you today about food. The back of the t-shirts say 4-H, feeding the future. Why does that matter? Why do we need to feed the future? Why does food matter? I have a question. How many of you in the last 24 hours have taken part in an agricultural act? Raise your hand.
That was me.
That's awesome. I don't normally get that. That's a lot of hands. Keep your hands up for a second, because I gotta... What was your agricultural act in the pink t-shirt?
I ate dinner.
Ate dinner. That's a good answer right now. I want to hear some other answers. What did you do? Did some farming. Definitely an agricultural act. I have one more hand. An agricultural act. What'd you do? Planted mushrooms. Certainly an agricultural act. So I want to get back to your answer. She said she ate dinner. What's agricultural about that? She didn't farm, she didn't plant anything, she didn't water anything. Well, let's see another raise of hands. How many people have eaten food in the last 24 hours? There we go. There we go. That's why food matters. Because of her answer right there. Because eating is an agricultural act. Food matters because we eat 3 times a day, and 3 times a day we're connecting to the land. And sometimes that connection, that relationship is a really, really good one. It's healthy, it's clean. Sometimes it's a really, really bad one. It's a twisted relationship. So food is at the heart of the biggest crises we face today. Take three of the big crises we face today. The health crisis, the economic crisis, and the energy crisis. In 2009, more people than ever before in history died of starvation. That same year, in 2009, more people than ever before in history were diagnosed as morbidly obese. That's an imbalance. 4 of the top 10 killers in the United States are diet-related diseases. Stroke, cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes. Food is at the heart of the health crisis. Every year, we spend $100 billion on diet-related preventable illnesses. Over 10 years, if that number doesn't increase at all, that's $1 trillion on preventable diet-related illnesses. And that brings us to the economic crisis. We're spending a huge amount of money on a food system that doesn't work. And then finally, the energy crisis. The biggest contributor to greenhouse gases in our economic sector is the food system, the food industry. There's a great story about how we move food around the world. Every year, we import 50,000 boxes of cookies from Denmark, which kind of makes sense because, the Danes, they know how to make cookies, they eat a lot of tea, they probably have a really good recipe for cookies. So it's okay that we import these 50,000 boxes of cookies from Denmark every year. But at the same time, every year, we export 40,000 boxes of sugar cookies to Denmark. A guy from the World Bank suggested that maybe we just swap recipes. We're spending a huge amount of energy on shipping food back and forth all over the world. So, and all of those crises fit under one heading, one that's close to home for me, the most important to me, which is the environmental crisis. And again, that's why food matters. 3 times a day, we eat food. And 3 times a day, by eating food, we're connecting to the land. And sometimes we're doing that by eating a carrot that our friend grew for us in his backyard. And sometimes we're doing that by eating a tomato that was grown in Chile. So that's why food matters. But I want to back up a bit. There's this you're spending the next few days talking about feeding the future, and you're talking about your careers, and you're looking forward to the future. And hopefully you're learning some skills that you'll take home and use to change your community. And ultimately, the people that leave this room and this conference are going to think about changing their communities and changing the world. I was in the garden the other day, that garden, and a little kid, it was a 4th grader, he looked up at me, out of nowhere, out of the blue, and he said, can one kid change the world? and I don't really know what to say, partly because I'm used to getting questions like, how big is an inch? Or is this a tomato plant? And so the whole like changing the world question kind of threw me for a loop. But also I realized that no one's ever asked me that before. I'm talking all the time about making change, and no one's ever asked me if one kid could change the world. So I haven't been able to stop thinking about that question over the last few days. I want to tell you a story. And my story is really about a story about a garden. But it doesn't start in a farm or in the kitchen or anywhere else you might expect for someone talking about food and farming. My story about a garden starts at a pond near my house. I live in rural western Massachusetts, and as a kid I spent all my time at this pond collecting bugs and frogs and all kinds of weird insects. And I fell in love with the natural world. And as I got older, it became a love of biology, of studying, of experimenting, of collecting weirder and weirder insects and doing weirder and weirder things with them. Lost a lot of friends that way. And then in 8th grade I saw a movie called An Inconvenient Truth, which some of you may have heard of. And I saw that movie, and I realized that all these things I cared so much about were in peril, were in danger. And so coming into high school, I was all worked up. I was like, oh, I love the natural world so much, and it's all in danger. What am I going to do? I'm going to come into high school, I'm going to save the world, it's going to be great. But then my older brother gave me a book called An Omnivore's Dilemma, and The Omnivore's Dilemma. And this book was about food, and it was about how farms, exactly the three things I talked about before, how farms were at the heart of these issues, how the way we grow food, when it's done badly, destroys the planet, and when it's done well, can save the planet. And so I came into high school realizing that food could save the world. And what happened was, I was a freshman in high school, and you guys all, some of you may be freshmen in high school, some of you may at one point have been freshmen in high school, maybe even a few of you are going to be freshmen in high school. When you're a freshman, you're ready to do big things. And so I had this idea that I was going to get all the food from my cafeterias to come from local farms. And when I would drive by my school, I'd notice all the land around our school, and I'd think, oh, maybe we'd have a little garden, like maybe the size of, a quarter of this stage. And I started talking to some friends, these two girls, Natalie and Sarah. And the more we talked, the more we thought, why not make it a bigger garden? Like a really big garden. Like maybe even a farm. And well, instead of getting all the food from local farms, why don't we just grow all the food for our cafeterias? And that's what we did. And so much happened so fast that sometimes I forget that the most important thing that happened was, well, we faced a lot of doubt. Because we were high schoolers. And you guys know high schoolers, we're lazy, we can't follow through on anything, we play video games all day, right? We don't do anything, right? So we faced a lot of doubt because we were warned that the school committee would tell us we couldn't use the land. We called farmers who said we were biting off way more than we could chew. We were told we were getting in over our heads. But despite all of that doubt, we did something important. We decided we were going to do it, no matter what. No matter what people said, we decided we were going to grow this garden. And sometimes that first step is the hardest of all. Maybe it was because we were really excited. Maybe it was because we were a little naive. Since then, I've learned how easy it can be to get discouraged, to give up, to let go of something. And I've learned because of that if you can take that first step, that if you can decide you're going to do something no matter what, the rest becomes a lot easier. So anyway, after a few months of designing the yearly plans for our garden, and fundraising, and raising money, writing grants, we planted a 3,500 square foot garden. Over that first summer, we donated over 1,000 pounds of produce to low-income families around the area and to shelters. We brought in kindergarten classes to learn in the garden. We taught high school biology classes in the garden. And when we came back to school in the fall, we tried our salads out in the cafeterias. Then, over the last two growing seasons, we've tripled the size of the garden. It's now 12,000 square feet. We've also put in 26 heirloom fruit trees, built 2 sheds, and a full-size greenhouse. We now have, every day, multiple classes come down from all 3 schools in our district to learn in the garden. In the fall, we do 3 days a week in all 3 cafeterias. We serve our vegetables. And in the spring, we do 2 days a week. And we're about to start. We've raised over $80,000 in the last 4 years. And in the beginning, we had 3 kids involved. We now have a board of 12 students and an advisory board of over 100. So that's my story. It's pretty simple, which is kind of why no applause yet. That story doesn't even deserve an applause. I promise. The thing is, it's really easy to listen to that applause because you don't know about all the horrible mistakes we made, which way outnumber the successes. So that story is simple. And that's why I was kind of thrown when this kid turned up to me and said, can a kid change the world? Can one kid change the world? So I was thinking about what's happened over the last 4 years. And actually the drive from my house to Cornell is pretty lengthy. So I had a lot of time to think about this question. And I think I have an answer. My answer is that first, changing the world has to happen 1 carrot at a time. It's messy. You make mistakes. It's slow. It's tedious. It's tiring. That first year, I told you, we got classes to come down to the garden, but it didn't happen like that. It wasn't that easy. What happened was, all the faculty were like, no way. We're overloaded. We have too much to do. There's no way we're adding extra stuff on our plates to bring kids down to some garden. So we were like, okay, that's fine. We understand. We have a lot to do. So what we did was, at the beginning of every week, we went to all the mailboxes in the faculty lounge, and each week we put a different vegetable in the mailbox. So the first week we filled all the mailboxes with cherry tomatoes, and the second week we filled all the mailboxes with carrots. And week by week, nothing happened. No response. People ate the carrots, the tomatoes, the radishes. But eventually one teacher said, hey, thanks so much for all those vegetables. And I was thinking, I might bring my class down to the garden. Is that cool with you guys? And we were like, sure. And then a few days later, another teacher said, hey, my friend went down to the garden, Mrs. Sullivan, and she said it was great. Can I bring my class down to the garden? And like I said, now every day we have multiple classes working in the gardens. It's slow. It's tedious. It's 1 vegetable at a time. The same thing happened with our cafeteria. We were determined. We had this dream of getting our food in the cafeterias, and we thought it'd be easy. You just grow the food, you bring it up to the cafeteria, and they serve it. No, it doesn't happen like that. The head of the food service program, Kathy, was not having it. She is used to just heating up packaged foods that are frozen, and that's all she has to do. There was no way she was going to take dirty, crooked vegetables and have to wash them and cut them and prepare them. There was no way she was going to do that. So every week, that first year, we emailed her, my friend Natalie, emailed her with a list of what we had. So every Saturday, she'd email and say, we have this many pounds of greens, this many pounds of carrots, this many tomatoes. And every week, Kathy would write back and say, sorry, not interested, we don't want to use your produce. And every week, Natalie would say, okay, that's fine. And the following week, she would send her the list again. Finally, after about 4 or 5 weeks of this happening, I think Kathy was just fed up with it. She was like, okay, fine. We'll try a salad. We'll take some of your greens, we'll take some of your cucumbers, and we'll do 1 salad in the lunches. And I'm sure in her head, that was it, and we'd give up and we'd be satisfied. Us high schoolers so easily satisfied. And what happened was, that day we came early at 6 a.m., we harvested tons of food, we brought it up to the cafeteria, we announced it on the loudspeakers, today the food that you guys grew in the garden is going to be in the cafeteria in the form of a salad. And in our school, on an average day, the cafeteria sells between 4 and 6 salads. That day, yeah, kind of rough, huh? That day, with the Project Sprout food, they sold over 70. And Kathy was hooked. And again, like I said, now we serve our food 3 days a week in the cafeterias. It takes patience. It takes understanding that it's not going to happen like right away. It's going to happen slowly. It's going to take a lot of people saying no over and over and over again. It's going to have to happen 1 carrot at a time. The second thing that changing the world takes is gardening in the rain. 2 years ago, 2009, I don't know if you guys remember or heard about it, but there was something called 350 Day. And 350 Day was supposed to be the biggest day of environmental action in history. It was organized in the fall. And people from all over the world were going to gather and hold up signs and gather in big masses and write out the number 350, which is an important number in terms of parts of carbon in the atmosphere. And it was really exciting. I helped organize an event in my town that was going to happen. We were all going to organize and do something to do with the number 350. And it was a Saturday. And Saturdays are our work days. And so that Saturday, we were also planning to build our greenhouse. We had gotten a grant for $7,000 to build this greenhouse. We were really excited because it was going to allow us to grow our food for the cafeteria even in the winter. But it was fine because I was going to show up at the garden at 7 in the morning. We were all going to build the greenhouse, be done by 3 o'clock, and then I was going to go to this really exciting event for the 350 Day. We get to the garden, and first of all, it's pouring rain. It's like 40 degrees and just pouring. And we started out with like 30 volunteers, which is great. But by like 10 a.m., it's down to 5 of us because people were sick and coughing and cold and uncomfortable. And we were missing all kinds of parts. Everything was missing. Things were mismatched. The drill didn't work. The generator didn't work. It was just all falling apart. By 12 o'clock, we had gotten one tiny hoop up for the entire hoop house. By 3 o'clock, when I was supposed to be leaving for this really exciting 350 Day, it was down to 3 volunteers, and we were about halfway done. By 7 o'clock, the sun was going down, and we were putting together the last few pieces of the hoop house. We got it done. I went home. I was exhausted. My pants were ripped. I was covered in mud, and my hands were numb, and I just fell asleep. And I woke up the next morning, and my email was flooded with emails from these organizations all over the world with pictures saying, you know, yesterday was the most important day in the history of environmental action. You know, everyone will be telling their grandkids about this, the day we all stood, you know, together, you know, for the environment. And there were emails from people in my community. Oh, where were you yesterday? It was so awesome. It was the best day in the history of Great Barrington. You know, what a wonderful day. And I kicked myself because I spent the day struggling in the cold and mud to get up together this hoop house. I kicked myself for missing what could have been the most important day in my life as an environmental activist. Some days we'll be rewarded with pats on the back, congratulations. People will tell us how proud they are of us, what a good job we did. But most days we'll struggle in the mud when no one is watching. Most days we'll argue with people about the value of local food or the environment. Most days we won't get rewarded with pats on the back. We'll just work and no one will notice. And it'll be worth it. If I could go back to that day and leave the garden at 3 o'clock and go to this 350 thing and not finish the hoop house, I wouldn't. Because we're now one step closer to serving our food year-round in the high school cafeteria. Sure, everyone else will be telling their grandkid about the time they stood up and with 350 people and all over the world and celebrated this day, but I'll tell my grandkids about the time I stood knee-deep in mud screwing together a few pieces of metal. To change the world, you have to be willing to garden in the rain. And finally, and by far, most importantly, to change the world, we need kids. I have a strict rule. I don't do talks in the summer. I'm a farmer. I'm not a speaker. And so in the summer, it's time for working in the garden, working on the dairy farm. It's not time for speaking. But it's June 28th, and I'm here. And that's because this is a room full of kids, high schoolers. This is the end of my time at Project Sprout. I just graduated. And so leading up to in the last few weeks, I was determined to make it be the best kickoff to a growing season ever. And I just thought if the growing season could get off to a good start, then Project Sprout would be fine for the rest of its time, and they wouldn't need me and everything would go smoothly. And a few weeks ago, things were not going smoothly. We had to build all 100 beds, and we hadn't even started. We were weeks behind schedule, and everything was just going horribly. And so one day, finally, we're still behind, but we were going to get started and build a few beds. And me and my friend Lauren went to the garden to build the beds. And we were there, we got out our shovels. 5 minutes later, Lauren is like, oh man, I got bad news. We forgot we have a meeting for our fundraiser today. We can't start on the beds. So I was like, okay, fine, we'll put the shovels away. And right then I see a car pulling up to the garden. And at first I don't recognize the car, and then I realize what it is. It's the car of this kid, George Cokerfer. And George Cokerfer is captain of the basketball team. He's a junior. And he's never been to the garden. And I was sure I would never see him at the garden. George Cokerfer pulls up, and he gets out of his car, and he goes, hey guys, what's up? I have a doctor's appointment in a little bit. I'm here to help. I got some time to kill. And we were like, sorry, George, but we're leaving. We actually got to pack up. We have stuff to do. Maybe next time. Thanks for stopping by. And George looked at us for a second. He was like, no, really, though. I have some time to kill. Can you just leave me a shovel, and I'll dig a few beds? So we said, okay, and we gave him a shovel, and we left. And Lauren and I went to our meeting, and our meeting was about 2 hours long. And about 6:30, we leave the meeting, and Lauren's like, oh man, I forgot my cell phone at the garden. We got to go back. So we drive back to the garden, and as we're pulling up, I see George Cokerfer's car. And I get out of the car, and I look up, and sure enough, there's George Cokerfer at the other end of the garden, working on his 20th bed, head down, hand on a shovel. The next morning was a community garden day. And I wasn't really expecting a lot of people. I showed up at around 9 a.m. and no one was there. And I thought, okay, that's fine, because there was a big party the night before, and I figured everyone was sleeping in. But around 11 o'clock, I see a bunch of kids in track uniforms coming over to the garden. And one of the kids comes up to me and he's like, hey, George Cokerfer said you guys needed help building beds, so we brought the track team. I was like, okay, sure. And a little while later, you see the baseball team coming over to the garden. And again, someone comes up and he's like, yeah, we heard you guys needed help. Everyone was talking about it, so we came to help build beds. By 1 o'clock, all 100 beds were built, and we were 2 weeks ahead of schedule. That's how it works. That's how things get done when kids are involved. When you got high schoolers there, that's how things get done. Sometimes it takes a year to build a hoop house you thought was going to take you a week. Other times it takes you a day to build the beds you thought would take you a month. I have one last story. Last summer, I was at an interview at my high school. It wasn't a work day in the garden, so I wasn't working in the garden. But I had to get picked up by my mom, and it's easier for her to pick me up in the garden. So I went down to the garden just to get picked up. And as I'm walking down, I see a mom and her little kid walking around the garden. And I thought maybe they were there to buy a t-shirt or ask for some vegetables. So I went over and asked if they needed any help. And the mom said, oh, hi, sorry, it's just that my son is in the after-school program. And every time we drive by the garden, he's like, Mommy, look, the garden, can we stop? And I never stopped, so today I thought I would stop and let him show me around the garden. Hope you don't mind. And so I said, sure, no, I don't mind. I'm just waiting for a ride. I'm going to go sit on the edge of the garden, and don't mind me. And I recognized the kid. His name is Parker Haynes, and he's a 4-year-old. He's in one of the after-school programs. And so I sat on the edge of the garden and watched as Parker Haynes led his mom around the garden on a tour. I couldn't see him the whole time, though, because every once in a while he'd disappear under the tomato plants because he's about this big. And so he's leading his mom around the garden, and I can hear some of the things he's saying. Not everything, but some of the things. I can hear him say, look, Mommy, these are my carrots. And we plant them with the tomatoes because they grow well together. And look, Mommy, these are beans and potatoes, and I plant them that way because they're friends. And so Parker Haynes leads his mom on this tour, and finally she's done with the tour. She said, okay, all right, time to go now, and they decide to leave the garden. But as they're walking out, they're about to leave, and he reaches up and grabs his mom's hand again, and he stops her. And he looks up at her with this look on his face. It's the look my cousin gets whenever she tries on her dress and asks her mom what it looks like. It was this worried expectancy. And Parker looks up at his mom and he says, Mommy, do you like my garden? I thought about that. And I looked out at this 12,000 square foot garden. And I looked down at Parker Haynes. And I realized he's 100% correct. It is his garden. And that's why kids matter. The kids matter because a 4-year-old who comes up to my knee can feel ownership over a 12,000 square foot garden. And a group of high schoolers that every single adult out there thinks spends their whole time playing video games and can't commit to anything, a group of high schoolers can feel ownership over the world and decide that they're going to change it and make it the right place that they want the future to look like. So the whole time I've been talking, I've had this photo up in the background. And it's a nice photo. It's from the gardens, kids, sunny day. And that photo sort of captures the stories. And it's an important story, I think. It's a nice story. It's the story about, the deliciousness of a tasty vegetable. It's a story about the relaxation of working in the garden on a sunny day. It's a story I would tell a room full of little kids. It's a story I would tell a room full of potential donors, probably even a room full of adults. But you guys are a room full of high schoolers, and the story that I want you to leave today remembering is this story. That's the story of trying to change the world one carrot at a time, as tedious and tiring and painful as it can sometimes be to work that slowly. It's the story of gardening in the rain and the snow and the cold when you're just craving warmth and sunlight and comfort. It's the story that if I told my grandmother that I was going to talk to you guys about today, she would be like, oh great, now none of them are ever going to garden in their lives. But I have more faith in youth, in kids, than my grandmother does. Because I know that it's a story that we're going to have to live if we want to change the world. And it's the story that only youth, only us are going to be able to carry out in order to make change. So 4 years ago, I started a garden. And I've said that sentence so many times now. And each time I say it, the length of time gets a little longer. So the first time I said, 6 months ago, I started a garden. And I was talking about a small 50 by 70 plot at my school. I just finished my freshman year of high school. And a few weeks ago, I graduated. After working in the garden every day for 4 years, I only have a few weeks left in the garden. And there are a lot of things I'm proud about. I'm proud that Shawnee Rodriguez decided that he likes sweet peas. I'm proud that the cafeteria workers know what kohlrabi is. And I'm proud that dozens of other schools have started Project Sprouts. But the thing I'm most proud of is that in a few weeks, when I leave Project Sprout, there won't even be a hiccup in its operation. And when I come back to visit a few years down the road, no one will recognize me. No one will have any idea who I am. They'll just hand me a shovel and ask me to start digging. The truth is, I haven't changed the world in the last 4 years. But what I've realized is that if people like George Kokefer keep staying late at the garden to dig beds, and kids like Parker Haynes decide that it's their garden, and all of us are willing to garden in the rain, then I don't have to change the world. The change will be inevitable. Thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.